Macmillan Audio presents Hitler's American Friends, the Third Reich's Supporters in the United States, by Bradley W. Hart. Read for you by Chris Andrew Ciulla. Introduction. On the evening of September 11th, 1941, one of America's most famous men took to a stage in Des Moines, Iowa, to discuss the national security issue that was on everyone's mind. Exactly 6 decades later, the date of Lindbergh's speech would be associated with a far different type of threat. But on this night, the famed aviator, the first man to fly solo across the Atlantic Ocean, Time magazine's first Man of the Year, and once estimated to be the most photographed man in the world, was discussing the war in Europe. The United States was not yet involved in the conflict, and if Lindbergh and his fellow members of the America First Committee had their way, it never would be. Lucky Lindy had been traveling the country for months arguing against American intervention in the war, making the case that the country's geographic separation from Europe and Asia, and its 2 bordering oceans, were sufficient protection from foreign attack. The United States should prepare for defense, not offense, Lindbergh and his associates believed, and if the country could establish a ring of air and naval bases around its perimeter, it would become an impenetrable fortress. Providing aid to Britain, the last Western European country still fighting the Germans, would simply detract from building up the country's defenses. This was the standard isolationist position before Pearl Harbor. Let the Europeans fight their own conflicts, and make sure America was sufficiently prepared to stay out of them. This fateful Iowa evening, however, Lindbergh deviated from the standard script. Perhaps he was full of confidence from becoming the America First Committee's most popular circuit speaker, receiving so many invitations to towns and cities across the country that there was simply no way he could accept all of them. No doubt he was partially inspired by the Roosevelt administration's recently passed Lend-Lease policy, which had made it through Congress earlier in the year and allowed the president to provide military vehicles, aircraft, and munitions to the ailing Allies. Whatever the exact alignment of reasons and circumstances, Lindbergh chose that night to unveil his own interpretation of American foreign policy. The consequences would haunt him for the rest of his life. In past speeches, Lindbergh had referred broadly to unnamed powerful elements that were seeking to draw the United States into the war, but he left the details up to the listener's imagination. Tonight, before a crowd of more than 7,000, he decided to reveal exactly whom he believed was behind the alleged push to war. There were, he told the crowd, 3 groups that had conspired to draw the country into the conflict: the British, the Jewish, and the Roosevelt administration. Together, he continued, these groups had executed a plan to draw the country into war gradually by building up its military and then manufacturing a series of incidents to force us into the actual conflict. Britain, he continued, might be able to hold out against the German onslaught. Yet even if it did, there was no hope of invading Europe and liberating France. Under normal circumstances, the British government would have made peace with the Germans long ago, but was merely holding out to make the United States responsible for the war financially as well as militarily. President Franklin D. Roosevelt was simply playing into the hands of the perfidious British. The bulk of Lindbergh's ire, however, was reserved for the second group he mentioned, the Jews. It was understandable that Jewish Americans sought war against Germany, he claimed, because the persecution they suffered in Germany would be sufficient to make bitter enemies of any race. However, the Jewish groups in this country should realize that in the event of war, they will be among the first to feel its consequences. Jews themselves, he concluded, presented a unique danger to the country because of their large ownership and influence in our motion pictures, our press, our radio, and our government. Despite the alleged machinations of these groups, Lindbergh reserved hope that they might cease their efforts to push the United States toward war. If that could be managed, he continued, I believe there will be little danger of our involvement. Lindbergh's speech was covered by major papers and carried on page
Sample complete. Ready to continue?